Farbrengen today, in general throughout the Farbrengen, the first two siches, as well as later in the Farbrengen, the theme which the Rebbe stressed very strongly throughout the entire Farbrengen was that this Thursday, for those that learn 3 Prokim Rambam a day, they finished the Rambam. Siyum HaRambam took place this Thursday. And the Rebbe stressed throughout the Farbrengen the great importance of a siyum, of making a big issue with us regarding a siyum. Now we spoke specifically that a few years ago, when the whole inyan of making large siyumim began, the Rebbe says he was reluctant how successful it would be. In fact, though we know that it's brought in Svarim that whenever we finish a Masechta or whenever we finish an inyan, we should make a siyum and we should celebrate, but nonetheless, to make it in such a format as it has been throughout the last several years, and the Hatzlacha, the success that it had, this is something which is much more than expected, and the results of it, of these siyumim, are that more and more Yidden are attracted to learn Rambam and to participate in the learning of the Rambam. And therefore the Rebbe urged everybody to participate in the Siyum HaRambam, which will take place tomorrow. And we should keep in mind, Beroiv Am Hadras Melech, that it's more beauty, Hadras Melech, the beauty, the glory of the king, is with how many more participants they are. It all adds glory, it all adds Hadras Melech. And therefore, throughout the Farbrengen, the Rebbe a few times urged on the importance of participating in tomorrow's Siyum HaRambam, as well as in Siyum HaRambams in general, wherever they take place, and talking specifically here in this city, it is the major Siyum HaRambam which is taking place tomorrow. And as the Rebbe began in the Farbrengen, though the Siyum was really Thursday, but there's still room to discuss the inyan of the Siyum today. First of all, for those who began learning Rambam again, and they began yesterday, the beginning of the new cycle, of this year's cycle. However, what we are learning now is the introduction of the Rambam, and also the list of mitzvahs which the Rambam lists before the Sefer, before he gets involved into the Chibur itself, into the original text of the Sefer. So really, we are not learning yet the halachas in the Rambam, halachas on the new cycle. This we are not beginning till another day or so. And besides, when did we finish? We finished on Thursday. Thursday afternoon Thursday in general has a shaychus to Shabbos. And particularly Thursday afternoon, we always know that from the afternoon of a day already has a shaychus to the next day. So the afternoon of Thursday has a very obvious shaychus to Shabbos, to Friday. And Friday is Erev Shabbos. So Memela, to discuss today's Farbrengen, the inyanim that have a shaychus to the Siyum HaRambam, it's appropriate, it's in the right place. Talking about the inyan of the siyum, how through a siyum, the whole idea of a siyum is that this should bring encouragement in learning Torah in general, and we should begin learning more Torah and again Torah, as we say in the text of a siyum, which we say at the end of a Masechta. When we finish a Masechta, we say, just like we finished this Masechta, the same way we should be fortunate to start and begin other Masechtas as well. When we're talking here about the Rambam, we finished one cycle of learning the Rambam, and what are we getting into? Learning another cycle of the Rambam. So obviously we're learning the same thing again. But still, our hope and wish should be that we're learning the same text. But this year's learning should be a much deeper one, and we should understand it much better than the learning which we learned last year. And here the Rebbe brought in an example. There's a Gemara. The Gemara tells us regarding Reb Zera, who was an Amoira. So Gemara says that Reb Zera fasted. There are two opinions. One opinion is that he fasted 40 days. Another opinion is that he fasted 100 days. What did he fast for? In order that he should forget Talmud Bavli, and he should begin learning Talmud Yerushalmi. In other words, he wanted to get Talmud Bavli, as it seems obviously, totally out of his head, so that he should have a pure and clear picture of Talmud Yerushalmi, and should not have the interference of Talmud Bavli still remaining in his mind. So the question arises, we know that everything in Torah, it is our obligation to remember. A person is not allowed to bring himself to a position where he will forget in Yonim and Torah. Besides, we know that fasting is also something which a person has to think twice before he does it. If fasting can be harmful to a person's health, then the Alpi Halach, he's not allowed to do it. The person is obligated, first and foremost, to worry for his health. Then here we say what? That Reb Zeir was so anxious to have a clear picture and a clear understanding of Talmud Yerushalmi that he went ahead and fasted 40 days, or according to another opinion, 100 days, to forget Talmud Bavli and get involved in Talmud Yerushalmi. This requires a very, very obvious explanation. It's very obvious that this requires an explanation. So the Rebbe is learning. In Torah, we have the halachas of Torah, and together with it, there's the shakla v'tari of Torah, which means the debate, the conversation, and the logic, and the whole build of the Gemara until the Gemara comes to a conclusion of a certain halacha. This we have in Bavli, and this we have in Yerushalmi. We have it in both Talmuds. What did Reb Zeir want? The halachas chas v'sholem. He did not want to forget the halachas of Torah. But what he wanted to forget was the conversation that's going on in Talmud Bavli, so that he should be able to approach Talmud Yerushalmi with a clear mind and not have anything from Talmud Bavli there which should be some sort of an interference. His mind should be pure and clear there to accept Talmud Yerushalmi. On the other hand, the halachas, which is the basis of Torah, chas v'sholem, this he did not want to forget. This a person is not allowed to forget. This is when we're talking about Reb Zeir, when he wanted to transfer from Talmud Bavli to Talmud Yerushalmi. Now that we're talking in the Rambam is a sefer of halacha. So the whole Rambam is only halacha. So actually, what is the difference of this year's learning Rambam as opposed to next year's learning Rambam? So the Rebbe is explaining, even in the halachas that we are learning, still there's some sort of reason in the halacha, there's some sort of, we don't just learn the dry halacha, we understand and we try to understand more than the dry halacha which the Rambam tells us. So this, our aim and goal should be that our understanding this year regarding all the inyanim which we will be learning in the Rambam should be a much better one and a much deeper one. Much more and much deeper than the understanding and the learning of Rambam, than the level we learned Rambam on in the past year. In other words, we should go into a yet deeper level of learning. And this is why we are stressing so much the whole union of a siyum and celebrating, so that this siyum should be an incentive, so that next cycle of learning should be learning on a yet deeper level. If we look into the Rambam, the way the Rambam is set up, first chelik the Rambam discusses, he discusses the halachas of Yesod HaTorah, where he brings out the Yesod HaYesodos, the Amud HaChochmos, that what is the most fundamental pillar is Leida Sheyesh Shem Matzur Rishon, to know on the existence of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Before the Rambam begins with these halachas, however, as we just mentioned, we have the Hakdam of the Rambam, we have the preface of the Rambam to a Sefer, and we also have the Minyan HaMitzvahs for the Rambam. The Rambam lists here all the 613 mitzvahs, divided mitzvahs asay and mitzvahs lois asay. So the Rebbe raised a kind of a question. If we look at the structure of the Rambam, we will notice that before every halacha, the Rambam lists all the mitzvahs that are in this halacha. Many a times, at the end of the halachas, the Rambam also summarizes and says, so we have all of these mitzvahs pertaining to this halacha. And nonetheless, before the Rambam starts the Sefer, he again lists all the 613 mitzvahs. Question is, why does the Rambam list the mitzvahs here again? Actually, all he's doing is he's just listing them 248 mitzvahs aseh and 365 mitzvahs leis aseh. And he's not explaining them or getting into any details and so forth. In learning, we know there's a concept of simonim. In other words, sometimes something is mentioned, even though it seems extra, it seems superfluous, so that by seeing these words, this will help us remember, this will be a kind of an indicator, this will be a kind of a sign, this will help us remember the halachas. The Rebbe says, based on these simonim, we find in Gemara that even entire halachas are learned, are based on such type of a simon. So, on the other hand, it's hard to say that the reason the Rambam is listing all the mitzvahs that many times, especially before he's starting a sefer, he's listing them again. And just a complete listing of all the mitzvahs, the reason for this is that we should have simonim. In other words, it should help us to memorize all the mitzvahs. It's hard to say that this is the only reason of the Rambam, why the Rambam is doing it. But on the other hand, we see that from the Rambam that his pattern was to stress many times all the mitzvahs. At any occasion he only had, he tried to bring out how many mitzvahs are involved regarding each issue. What does he begin here in the mitzvahs aseh? The first mitzvahs aseh that he mentions is the first mitzvah is Leida, that we should know Sheyesh Shem Elokai, Shenemar Anochi Hashem Elokecha. What is the first of all mitzvahs? That we have to know of the existence of the Rebbe. So here too the Rebbe asked, when we're talking about mitzvahs, what is mitzvahs? Mitzvahs means this is the desire of the Rebbe. So when we're talking about the mitzvah, obviously we know that there is a mitzvah. There is somebody who's commanding the mitzvah. If we are looking at mitzvahs, what's the pshat? These mitzvahs were commanded by someone who told us to do these mitzvahs. Who is the someone who instructed us to do these mitzvahs? It's the Rebbeinu Shalom. So obviously, what kind of... I was asking, how can we understand that the Rambam is listing as one of the mitzvahs? One of the mitzvahs is what? Leida, to know that there is a Rebbeinu Shalom. We cannot approach mitzvahs. In other words, our entire approach to mitzvahs is only based on the fundament that there is an Eibishter. Otherwise, we can't approach mitzvahs. How are we approaching mitzvahs? Because the Rebbe told us to do these mitzvahs, so we are fulfilling his wish. But the fact that there is Sheyesh Shem Elokai, that there is an Rebbe, this is something which we have an assumption, this is something which we take for granted before we even enter to fulfill the mitzvahs. If we are searching for mitzvahs, we want to know what the list of mitzvahs are. We want to know what the Rebbe told us to do. So it's like I just said, what the Rebbe told us to do. So automatically we are realizing that there is the Eibishter. There is an Eibishter. And we want to know what are the mitzvahs that the Eibishter told us. What does the Rambam say? The first of all mitzvahs is Leida, to know Sheyesh Shem Elokai, that there is an Eibishter. Obviously, this is something which we should know, and we ought to know before even we are approaching even the first mitzvah. Because the minute we are entering and looking and searching for mitzvahs and listing mitzvahs, all mitzvahs are based on the fact that they come from the Rebbe. Basically, the Rebbe spoke a hadron, this whole sikha, how the Rebbe explained the importance of learning Rambam in general, and the beginning of the Rambam, and as we will see soon, the end of the Rambam. It was in a very lengthy sikha, very deep sikha, which this sikha was the first sikha of today's Farbrengen, which went on for a little over an hour and a half. It was over 90 minutes that the Rebbe explained this whole inyan. And basically, what she brought out is based on what Chassidus explains, that we know that in knowing of the Rebbe there are definitely various levels. And naturally, we have to have the for granted that there is the existence of the Rebishter before we approach any of the mitzvahs, because if we're looking for mitzvahs, it is automatically understood that there is a mitzvah ha-mitzvahs, there's somebody who commanded us the mitzvahs. But at the same time, in the knowing of the existence of the Rebishter, there are still many levels, as explained in Chassidus. So what does the Rambam tell us? The first mitzvah is that a person should make it his business, leida, to know sheyesh shem elokah, to know as much, to search and to know on the existence of the Rebishter. And therefore, once he will know that, this will lead to the other mitzvahs, to like him and to fear him, which are all basic fundamental mitzvahs, which the Rambam lists them all as the very beginning of the counting of the mitzvahs haseh. Interesting, it is a custom whenever we celebrate a siyum, the Rebbe notes, that we usually try to combine and discuss the end of the Masechta and tie it together with the beginning of the Masechta. It is correct based on an expression which is often quoted in Chassidus, Na'ut tchilosam b'soifan, that the beginning and the end are planted in together. In other words, there is always a relation between the beginning and the end. And the same we will notice here in the Rambam, that there is a very obvious relation between the beginning of the Rambam and with the end of the Rambam. The Rambam begins his chibur in the first halacha, Yesoid ha-yesoidois va'amud ha-chochmes, as we mentioned before, that what is the fundament and a pillar of all of wisdom, to know the existence of the Rebishter. So the Rambam uses the expression leida, to know. If we were to look at the end of the Rambam, very end, the last halach of the last sefer of the Rambam, there the Rambam discusses what the world will be like when Mashiach will come. And he concludes with the pasuk, Umala ha'oretz deya es Hashem, the world will become full with wisdom, knowing about Getlichkeit, knowing about the Rebishter, about godliness, kamayim layom mechasim, just like water, just like water covers the ocean, the same way the entire world will be covered and filled with wisdom of godliness. This is how the Rambam concludes his sefer. The Rambam there again uses the expression Umala ha'oretz deya, wisdom. Here at the beginning of the sefer, he uses also the expression how it is the pillar and the wisdom of all of wisdom and the fundament of all of fundaments. Leida sheyesh shem motzirish, to know on the existence of the Rebishter. So he also uses the word leida, to know. The Rebbe is bringing out. Rambam is going step by step. Naturally, when a person is beginning to learn Rambam, he's at one level. And when we finish the Rambam, we ought to be at a much higher level. When we begin to learn Rambam, the Rambam is telling us that we are confronted with a world which we see in front of us. We should know that there's a fundament to this world. There are basics to it. There are pillars to it. And what is the Yesoid ha-Yesoidos? The fundament of all fundaments. And the Amud, the pillar of all of wisdom. A person has to know that is leida, to know on the existence of the Rebishter. So in other words, a person is seeing the world, sees everything which was created in front of him, and he knows that what is behind all of this is the Rebishter. The Rebbe is bringing an example how we find an inyan in halacha. In the halachas of korbanos, Beis Hamikdash, it's brought in the Rambam, it's discussed in Gemara, that when a dish is used in the Beis Hamikdash, when a vessel is used in the Beis Hamikdash for the use of korbanos, a klei shoreis as it's called, a keli which is used for the service of the Beis Hamikdash, this keli always had to be filled up. Whenever you use the keli, with whatever contents you used it, The keli always had to be full to the top. But we say full to the top, but not overflown and not covered by what you fill it with. In other words, if we were to fill a cup in the Beis HaMikdash with wine, for example, using it as an example, the cup would be filled with wine. But it doesn't mean it's what is full, the contents of the cup is full. It doesn't mean we take the entire cup and we dip it into wine and make it covered by wine. What the Rambam is telling us at the end of his Sefer, that when Mashiach will come, the world will be U'mala ha'oretz deyos Hashem kamayim layom mechasim, just like water covers the ocean. There the Rambam is talking on a much higher level. There the Rambam, what do we mean water covers something? The nature is, if we were to put something into an ocean, the object which we put in cannot be seen. Why can't it be seen? Because it is completely covered by water. The same we are saying. When Mashiach will come, the world will be full with Gettlichkeit to such an extent, just like water covers whatever is in the water. Just like when water at the ocean, we cannot see the ocean, we cannot see anything, all we see is water. The same thing the Rambam is telling us. When Mashiach will come, the world will be uplifted to such a madrege that all we will see will be Gettlichkeit. Not the pshat, just that we will realize that the basic of everything and the fundament of everything is Gettlichkeit. This is phase one. This is the first level. After we will go through the entire Rambam and we will come to the madrege, when Mashiach will come, there the revelation of godliness will be in a much higher level. The revelation of godliness then will be in a madrege of U'mala ha'oretz deyos Hashem. The world will be full with godliness, wisdom of the Rebishter, but in what oifen? Kamayim layom mechasim. Just like water covers the ocean, the same way godliness will cover the entire world. In other words, nothing will be felt for a mitzias in itself. Everything, when Mashiach will come, every human being, what will he feel? He will not feel himself, he will feel Gettlichkeit. The elevation then will be to such a madrege that what will a person feel? A person will feel only Gettlichkeit. Now a person only realizes that Gettlichkeit is behind everything. It's the Yesod HaYesodos, it's the Amud HaChochmes. We have to know what the pillar of all of wisdom is, to know on the existence of the Rebishter. But what do we see? We see a world and everything that's in it. But we know behind all this, what is the... Just like a Yesod, what is a Yesod? A Yesod is a foundation. A foundation, a building can be built once there is a foundation. The foundation which we have now is what? That everything is from the Rebishter. But at this moment we only realize this as a foundation. When Mashiach will come, then the world, wherever we will turn, the entire world, what will it be filled with? Gettlichkeit. And in what way? Kamayim layom mechasim. The Rebbe went on in the course of the Sikha, also bringing out how these opening words of the Rambam, Yesod HaYesodos v'Amud HaChochma, as the Rambam's grandson Reb David writes, that this is with these words, this is an abbreviation of the Rebishter's name, and this is how the Rambam began his Sefer with. Also, the Rebbe discussed in general the Svarim of the Rambam. We know that the Rambam wrote the Yad HaChazaka, which we are talking about now. The Rambam also wrote the Meir Nevuchim. The other Svarim which the Rambam wrote, besides the Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam wrote them all in Arabic, and they were later translated into Hebrew. The Yad HaChazaka the Rambam wrote in its original text in Lashon HaKodesh, and this is the text which we learn now from. This is the way it was written by the Rambam. There are those that claim, the Rebbe says, that there are differences, contradictions between the Rambam in the Yad HaChazaka and the Rambam in the Meir Nevuchim. And therefore they want to come to an assumption, want to assume that The Rambam wrote halachas, wrote the halachas. But when the Rambam was involved with giving guidance to the nevuchim, to the confused, there the Rambam could have written things which are contradictory to what he wrote in the Sefer of halachas. The Rebbe says we cannot accept such an idea when we're talking about a person the caliber like the Rambam. In fact, the Rambam himself in Hilchas Deis explains what a chacham is and how a proper chacham is supposed to act. So what are we going to say? That the Rambam in one sefer he's writing things one way, and comes in another sefer, the same person is going to write things different. This is not how we can describe a person like the Rambam. If there are questions, contradictions between one sefer and the other, then naturally they have to be answered, they have to be looked into, it has to be explained. But we cannot just take for granted and say that the Rambam deliberately wrote contradictions between the Sefer Hamada, between the Yad HaChazaka, beginning from Sefer Hamada, and the Meir Nevucha. This we cannot say. It's just that certain inyanim in certain places have to be explained one way, and certain inyanim in certain times have to be explained different, but not that the Rambam deliberately went ahead and contradicts himself from one sefer to another. The Rebbe brought in an example to this, a very interesting example. We know that the Rebishter's name, when we say now the Rebishter's name, the Shem of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is Hashem's name, we pronounce it with the pronunciation of Adonai, as if it would be written that way. Regarding Birchas Koyanim, Rebbe says, we find in Gemara that the Gemara tells us that when the Koyanim would be duchening anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, they would pronounce the Rebishter's name like I just said. They would pronounce Shem Hashem with a pronunciation of Adonai. If they would be duchening in the Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara says, then they would not pronounce the Eibishter's name this way, but they would pronounce it with the Shem HaMefeirish, which is not known to us now, but they would pronounce it directly the Eibishter's name. Rabbi asks, it's the same Koyanim, the same Birchas Koyanim. And what do we mean by Birchas Koyanim? When a Kohen gives a bracha, is this his own bracha? It's not his own. He's serving as an emissary from the Eibishter. And really, it is Va'ani Avarachem. It is the Eibishter who's really sending the bracha. And the Rebishter is channeling the bracha through Kohen. So why should we say that when they're in one place, he should express himself in one way, and when they're in the Beis HaMikdash, they should express themselves different? But the explanation for this is, of course, when they're in Beis HaMikdash, there's a higher revelation of godliness there. We cannot compare the Gilui Elokus as it was in Beis HaMikdash to as it is opposed in the entire Medina, in the entire country. So that is why it affected even the Koyanim. When they got up to say Birchas Koyanim, that when it came to pronounce the Rebishter's name, if they were in a place where there's a bigger Gilui Elokus, where there's more revelation of godliness, they would pronounce it directly as his name is. And if they would be Medina, they would pronounce it in a pronunciation of Adonai. Same the Rebbe is bringing out in a similar way is the idea that we find contradictions between the Rambam in the Sefer Hayad and the Rambam in the Meir Nevucha. It's not the pshat that the Rambam deliberately is contradicting himself. There are certain inyanim which the Rambam is explaining in the Meir Nevucha, and to whom he's addressing himself in Meir Nevuchim is that he's trying to explain the inyan to them so that they should understand. And when the Rambam is talking in the Yad HaChazaka, here he's saying the inyan as it is based on halacha. It was throughout the Farbrengen in this Sikha with the Rebbe, I call offhand how the Rebbe got to it. The Rebbe mentioned an interesting episode between Reb Chaim Brisker and the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father. Reb Chaim Brisker and the Rebbe Rashab were extremely close. There was a very close relationship between them. They usually would have opportunities to meet and get together. They were involved in many communal matters together, and it was at meetings and conventions, at Rabbanische meetings of Gedolei Yisrael, where Reb Chaim Brisker and the Rebbe Rashab would have an opportunity to get together and meet personal, and there was a very warm relationship between the two of them. And the Rebbe says it was once an incident which the Rebbe Rashab expressed himself that he would like to take a certain stand regarding a certain matter. So Reb Chaim Brisker told him, asked him, what are you basing your stand on? And the Rebbe Rashab answered to him, by mir legt sich azoi, which means this is how it seems to me. I cannot explain it in words, in other words, but it seems to me that this approach would be the best. So he asked him again, how are you relying on the way it seems to you? In other words, wow, what source? What is the source of your decision? What are you basing your decision on? Just on the fact that it seems to you this way. So the Rebbe Rashab responded to him that from his early childhood, he trained his body that his body should act only in accordance to halacha and not any different. And therefore now, if he feels that this is the way something should be done, obviously he hopes that his feeling is on the right path. Itaki cannot explain himself, and it's hard for him to put it into words why he has chosen this type of an approach, but he hopes, being that he has lifted up his body to such a level that his guf to act only as it is in accordance to Shulchan Aruch, so that this decision which he is taking is also in accordance to Shulchan Aruch. The Rebbe compared it. In Gemara there's an expression regarding certain Tanoim and Amoraim that when they came to Moedim in the middle of davening Shemona Esrei, min nafshei kokara, their body would automatically bow down. In other words, they purified their body to such an extent, not that he had to have his intention. But now that we're up to Moedim Anachnu Loch, he will bow down. It is not so. When he came to Moedim, the body automatically bowed down. The same the Rebbe Rashab said regarding himself. He has worked out his body to automatically respond to Shulchan Aruch. Talking on the Rambam, the Rebbe continued. He says there are two aspects regarding the Rambam which would be worthwhile to do research into. And the number one is the fact, how did the name Yada Chazaka develop to the Sefer of the Rambam? First of all, when did it get the name Yada Chazaka, and how, and so forth. We know that the Rambam writes in his Akdam, in the preface to his Sefer, that he's naming his Sefer Mishnah Torah. This is the Rambam himself writes that a person can have the alternative of learning Chumash, and from Chumash can go straight to his Sefer, and if he will go straight to his Sefer and learn through this entire Sefer, he will be well versed in the entire Torah. Rebbe says there's a known story regarding three Gedolei Yisrael who gave names to their Sefer, and their names kind of were not accepted. It is the Rambam that named his Sefer Mishnah Torah, a repeat of Torah, and the world did not accept it, because we know that Mishnah Torah, we refer to Chumash Dvarim, has the title of Mishnah Torah, because Moshe Rabbeinu repeated the Torah, a summary of all Torah, we find in Chumash Dvarim. So for this reason, the world did not adopt the name of Mishnah Torah to the Rambam. You don't say the Mishnah Torah. But what title was adopted? The title of Yada Chazaka. So the Rebbe is saying, we're asking, who gave it the name Yada Chazaka? When was it? In other words, the Rebbe says it would be appropriate to come up with some authentic research. When did the name Yada Chazaka develop to the Rambam? When did this get attached to the Rambam, that the Rambam should be called with the name Yada Chazaka? And who was the person that gave him the name? Obviously, there is an obvious shaykhs. Yada Chazaka, Yad equals 14. And the Sefer of the Rambam, it's divided into 14 parts. So for this reason, naturally, they chose Yada Chazaka, the strong arm. But again, who did it? When did it happen? Who were the Gedolei Yisrael that were behind it to give it this name? And when was it that they gave it this name? Another one of the Svarim is the Shalah. The Shalah named his Sefer Shnei Luchis Habris, 2 Luchis. And again, the world does not call him Shalah, but we refer to him, does not call it Shnei Luchis Habris, but we always refer to it by its abbreviation, which is Shalah. And interesting, it doesn't mean Chas v'Shalom that we don't recognize the godless of the author of the Shalah, because you will notice that whenever Yidden refer to the Shalah, they always say the Shalah HaKodesh, the Holy Shalah. So we see that we talk about him with tremendous amount of respect, that we refer to him as Shalah HaKodesh. Just like the Rebbe also mentioned, there's the commentary on Chumash, Eir HaChaim, and regarding the Eir HaChaim, people always refer to him the Eir HaChaim HaKodesh, the saintly Eir HaChaim. So the same way regarding the Shalah. And again, we notice that the name was not adopted by people as Shnei Luchis Habris. How do we refer to him? We refer to him as the Shalah. But Taka Shalah HaKodesh. Third one of such of the Gedolei Yisrael is the Alshich. Alshich, who lived in the same time as the Beis Yosef. And the Alshich named his Sefer Toras Moshe. So again, people did not accept the name. Say somebody names a Sefer Toras Moshe. So how do we always refer to his Sefer? Not by his name of the Sefer, but the Alshich. Rebbe mentioned all of this because we got into the discussion of the Rambam not being referred to as Mishnah Torah. Another inyan regarding the Rambam, which requires worthwhile to look into, is regarding the Rambam's father. The Rambam's father was named Maimon. As we know that the Rambam himself, as he writes in the Hakdamah, referring to himself, he writes, Ani Moshe ben Maimon HaSvardi. He, Moshe ben Maimon, the Svardi. So there are some that write that why does the Rambam give himself the title the Svardi? Because obviously there was another Moshe ben Maimon in that time, and the Rambam wanted you to know who is he, so he wrote it as he is identifying himself that he is Moshe ben Maimon the Svardi. Other reasons for this are given because the Rambam in the text of his Sefer brings many minhagim, how they were in these countries or in other countries. So we should know that the Rambam followed the minhagim of the Svardim. The Rambam was a Svardi, so that's why he's mentioning that he was a Svardi. Question, however, is regarding the Rambam's father's name, Maimon. Where did this name originate from? Where do we find the name Maimon? Obviously, Maimon is based on the word Mayim, which means water. It seems like this was the only name he had, because we do have correspondence. There are tshuvas from the Rambam, what he wrote to his father. And he addresses him, refers to him also by his name, and his name is Maimon. So, Rebbe is like kind of alerting us, where did this name Maimon really begin? Is it a Hebrew name? Is it a name that has its sources like a secular name? The Rebbe mentioned that there's a Gemara. Gemara tells us at times people would give certain secular names. There's a Gemara that people gave names after a king because that king was extremely kind. So in order to express appreciation to the king, the people afterwards named children to the same name as that king was, though it was a secular name. So we do find, even amongst Yidden times, that a secular name is introduced. So Rebbe is raising the question, where does this name Maimon stem from? What is the source of the name Maimon? Where did it originate, and so forth? And again, the Rebbe suggested that it's worthwhile to research after this and to come up with some proper information, authentic information. The Maimer which the Rebbe said today was based on the Maimer in Torah Eir, and when the Rebbe refers to Torah Eir many times, which is a selection of Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe based on Sedres, on the Chamoshim of Bereshis and Shmois, Rebbe usually refers to it with the title the Chasidische Sedre. We have the regular Sedre, that's the Chumash. The Chasidische Sedre is the way the Inyanim are explained according to Chassidus in the light of Chassidus, and that is in the Torah Eir. And in Torah Eir he explains at the beginning of this week's Sedre, Va'era el ha'ovis. The Rebbe says that he has revealed himself to the Ovis. And he brings out that Va'era is an expression of past tense, however it's also an expression of present and an expression of future. And he brings out that every Yid has within himself a nitzut sparks from each one of the Ovis. In other words, each one of the Avos had their separate specialty drachim in Avodas Hashem. Every one of them had the area that they excelled in. Avraham excelled in Chesed, in Ahava. It was Yitzchak who served the Rebishter through Yira, through Midas HaGvura, and it was Yaakov who served the Rebishter through Midas HaTiferes, through the Midah of Rachmanis. And that is why we say in davening always, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. Each and every one of us says it. Why? Because the others are our fathers. Every Yid has a shaykhs to each one of the others. Every Yid does not have a shaykhs to each one of the shvatim. Each one of the shvatim had its separate way of serving the Rebishter. And this was something which was transmitted to the members of that shevet. However, when we're talking about others, there is a contribution made by each one of the others to each and every Yid. And Mamela, each and every Yid has within him now as well, until nowadays, these various midos which were transplanted into us by the others. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, how a child to inherit, a child does not have to have any special qualifications. It's explained in Chassidus based on halacha. A child who can be a day old, if somebody passes away, if his father, it shouldn't happen, passes away, the day old child can inherit him. What does this mean? It means inheritance is something which comes automatically. Memela, each and every Yid has an automatic shaykhs to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Memela, their derech of serving the Rebishter is something which was instilled into each and every Yid. As customary later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe explains in Yonim and Rashi, and also in the Zohar with the commentary of his father. And interesting, in the Zohar, in this week's Zohar, on Va'era La'avos, right at the way, the first commentary of his father at the beginning of the Sedra, in Va'era, the Zohar brings also about the inyan of to know of the existence of the Rebishter. So the Rebbe tied in also the inyan of the Zohar, that it has a shaykhs, it is related to the Siyam HaRambam, to the inyanim which we discussed, the beginning of the Sefer of the Rambam, as well as the first mitzvah which the Rambam explains, which is all based on the mitzvah of knowing of the existence of the Rebishter. And this is also discussed in this week's Zohar. Now let us go to the Rashi in the Sedra. Pasuk begins, Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe, the Rebishter spoke to Moshe, Vayemer Elav, and he told him, Ani Hashem. So Rashi quotes, Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe, the Rebishter spoke to Moshe. So Rashi says, Diber itoin mishpat. He spoke to him, we would teach it, words of judgment, strict words. Al shehikshe ledaber v'loima loma hariyesa loma zeh, because Moshe spoke out to the Rebishter, and he said, why did you make it worse for them by sending me to them? So the Rebishter now is criticizing him. He's telling him that the others never doubted my words, and you are doubting my words. Actually, this is not the first time that the Shem Elokim is being mentioned in Chumash. And nonetheless, it is here that Rashi is explaining that what does it mean? Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe. He's speaking strict words, strong words. We know there is a difference between Shem Havaya and Shem Elokim. Shem Havaya, Shem Hashem is Chesed, and Elokim is Gvura, strength, power, Din. Also, there's a difference between Vayomer and Vayidaber. Vayomer means soft speaking. Vayidaber is harsh, a harsh way of speaking, a strong way of speaking. When the brothers came back from Mitzrayim, from Yosef, they told Yaakov, Diber oish adonai oretz itonu koshes. He spoke with us strong words. So what expression? They didn't say Omar ha'ish, they said Diber ha'ish. So we see that Dibur relates to strict kind of speaking. So obviously here, Pasuk uses the expression Vayidaber and Elokim. So that is why Rashi is learning Diber Itoi Mishpat, that he spoke with him strong words. But you will notice Rashi uses the expression Mishpat. Rashi doesn't say Diber Itoi Koshois, he spoke to him strict words. Rashi says Mishpat. Mishpat means judgment. Rabbi says this is very simple. Why? Because the name of Elokim, besides Elokim referring to the Rebishter, the name Elokim can also be used when we're talking about a Bezdin. A Bezdin, we find psukim in the Torah that refer to a Bezdin Elokim. Why? Because a Bezdin comes out with a Mishpat. One who issues a Mishpat, one who issues a judgment, is called Elokim. So Mela, now that the Pasuk uses the expression Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe, the Rebbe spoke to Moshe, and the expression is Vayidaber, and the expression is Elokim. This is an indication that here he's speaking to him what words of Mishpat. Then the pasuk goes on, Vayomer Elov Ani Hashem, and he's telling him, Ani Hashem, I am the Rebbe, that I am the Rebbe that will Nemo l'shalem sochar toiv l'mishalchem lafonai. The Rebbe says, I am Hashem, who can be trusted to reward those that go on my path, those that follow me. And the Rebbe says, it seems to him that really this is all one Rashi. See, when we are now a Chumash, we are used to a system that the words from the Pasuk are quoted in regular lettering, and the words from Rashi are in Rashi's lettering. Now the person who typeset this Pasuk, typeset this Rashi, Hebrew he's called, in Yiddish he's called Habucher HaZetzer. A Zetzer means somebody who would be a typesetter. And so really he saw the word that Rashi is going on with Vayomer Elov Ani Hashem. So he knows that Vayomer Elov Ani Hashem, these are words from the Pasuk. So that's why he put them back into the same letters as quotation words. Mm-hmm. But really, this is not quotation words. In other words, Rashi is really explaining on one Dibur HaMaschil, he's explaining the entire Pasuk. Vayomer and Hashem, this is, Hashem is an expression of Chesed, and Vayomer is a soft talk. So Rashi is bringing out, here we have a serious talk, tough talk, or strict talk. The Pasuk uses Vayidaber and Elokim. Notice that the second half of the Pasuk has Vayomer and Hashem. So Mamela, this leads me to learn that the first thing that Rebbe told them, he told them strong words, serious words. That's why there's a difference between why the Pasuk begins with Vayidaber and goes on with Vayomer. And for the same reason, the Pasuk begins with Elokim, because he told them words of Mishpat, and he goes on later with Hashem, which is already a promise of a reward which the Rebbe will give. Now let us go weiter in the Psukim. Pasuk goes on, and Pasuk Vav,
The Rebbe is telling Moshe, Lachin Emel of Yisrael, therefore tell the Yidden, Ani Hashem, I am thy Eibishter, V'hitzesi eschem etach asivlis Mitzrayim, I will take you out of Mitzrayim, V'hitzalti eschem avedosom, and I will save them from their hard work. And Moel of Yisrael, tell the Yidden, Ani Hashem, I am the Eibishter, Hanemon b'avtechosi, who can be believed, who can be trusted. So what is Rashi really explaining? Rashi is explaining the words of Ani Hashem. Was meint Ani Hashem? It means Hanemon b'avtechosi. I am the Eibishter, that if I pledge something, he will ultimately do it. He's bound to do it. He wouldn't do different than what he pledged. So the Rebbe is asking, based that every word from Rashi is extremely accurate, and the quotation from the pasuk is also, which is by Rashi, why does the pasuk quote the words and Moel Livnei Yisrael? Tell the Yidden. What kind of an importance is to quote these words? Mainly Rashi is out to explain Ani Hashem. Was meint Ani Hashem? Hanemon b'avtechosi, the Eibishter that can be believed, that can be trusted with his pledge. So the Rebbe is learning what's happening here. The Yidden are complaining to the Eibishter. They are screaming. The Eibishter promised that he will take them out of Golus. And he hasn't fulfilled it yet. So they are full of strong complaints. As we discussed last week, the Rashi, that they came to a situation where Pari was killing Jewish children. He was bathing in their blood. And this was a cure to improve Pari's health. So Yidden are let down. They're terribly let down. What's going on? What's happening? Our children are being slaughtered by Pari. He's bathing in their blood. And that's a cure for him. We are into hard and terrible and miserable work. What's going on? The fact that the Eibishter promised them that he will take them out of Golus, they remembered that. Sure, they knew that, but they were complaining. Where do we see the Eibishter's promise being fulfilled? So the Eibishter is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, if you Moshe, you the same person that just complained to me and was screaming, Lama Harayosa, that I made it worse for them by coming. If you, Moshe, is going to go and tell the Yidden that the Eibishter will take you out of Golus, and the Eibishter will put an end to all of Yitzaris, they will believe. The fact that they have the promise from me, but they're lacking emunah in that, because they're seeing different things. So they are disappointed. But if you, Moshe Rabbeinu, so that's why Rashi is quoting, and Moel Livnei Yisrael Ani Hashem, you, Moshe, have to go and tell it to them. You, Moshe, will tell them. You, the same person that they know very well that you are also complaining on the fact how hard they are in Golus and how hard it is for them in Golus. If you will go ahead and complain, you the one that complained, and you will go ahead and tell them now that the Eibishter will take him out of Golus, then definitely this will awaken within them the belief that the time will come that the Golus will end and I will take him out. Now Rashi goes on, I will take you out. This is how I promised. That later they will go out with a lot of riches. Rebbe says, how does the union of a lot of riches come here? Where do we find that in the pasuk? The pasuk here doesn't mention it. Why does Rashi mention it? Rebbe says we could learn two ways. Number one, we could learn that it means that Moshe wanted to give them some sort of an incentive. Though that you go through such hardships and galus, but you should know the time will come. So hold out a little bit longer, and you will go out with a lot of wealth. That's one way of learning. Another way of learning is Rabbi is learning Kikein Iftachtiv. This is the Rebbe says, this is what I promised. I promised I will take him out. This was not put in by Rashi. This was a pasuk which again used the expression the Bacher Hazetza. The typesetter, he knows that he's working with these Rashis, he's typesetting these Rashis, and he's typing the words Kikein Iftachtiv, that the Rebbe has promised that the Yidden will go out of Golus. So it dawns on him, what did the Rebbe promise? So this addition here in Rashi may not be from Rashi. So Rebbe says it's up to us. We can choose whatever interpretation we want. If we want, we could learn that these are not the words of Rashi. If we want, we could learn it is the words of Rashi, but this Rashi is explaining what Moshe Rabbeinu was adding on here to the Yidden. Rebbe will take you out. And he must take you out. The only thing that will take a little bit longer, because the Rebbe is promising you, the Rebbe concluded, now we are waiting for the coming of Mashiach, and we have no time to postpone, and every year, the Loi Golas, as the Rebbe uses the expression, is ready to put an end to Golas, and here the Rebbe mentioned that the Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch that every Yid is obligated to learn the entire Torah. And if he doesn't finish it in one Gilgul, it will happen in the next Gilgul. Next time that his neshama comes down into this world. The Rebbe says now we cannot afford any luxuries to say that this part of Torah I will learn. The other part of Torah I'm not in a rush to learn, because if I'm not going to learn it now, I may as well learn it in the next time my neshama will come down into this world. The Rebbe says now it's too late. Mashiach is about to come right away, and there will be no more Gilgulim. So everybody has to chaparain as much as possible, whatever he could only lay his hands on, in the learning of Torah. Because Mashiach is coming, here he is, he's coming right away. And therefore, Rabbi concluded again, let us hope for the coming of Mashiach as soon as possible. And also, reminded that we bench the month of Shvat. This is the month that has the Yotzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Regarding the beginning of the month of Shvat, there's a pasuk. It was the first day of the 11th month that Moshe began to translate the entire Torah. Hayil Moshe Bayeres HaTorah Azois. So the Rebbe always comes to this pasuk, he refers it to the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe was the one that really began translating Chassidus into other languages, saw to it that Chassidus should be translated into other languages, and to reach out to each and every Yid, so that every Yid will be able to have an understanding of Torah and an understanding of Pnimis HaTorah. A gute Woche.